Hello, my friend. This is Clyde. For Men Only, Part 2. Please take the call. Every one of us has a cell phone. That cell phone is a very important tool, but you will acknowledge there's a second phone that we each carry, and one of these days you might get an important call on that private phone. My brother, let us talk about calls that come on the private phone. It's usually one person who calls on that line, and you might find yourself thinking, should I take it? Or if I ignore the call long enough, will it stop ringing? Today we're continuing our discussion directed to men, and we are going to create that scenario. You're hanging out with your friends and the private phone rings. Are you the guy who puts your phone on silent so you don't hear when it rings? Some guys let that phone ring because they don't want to be interrupted. Others dismiss the call because they don't wish to speak to the person who is calling. And still others will let it ring until the person hangs up. The next time that phone rings and you know that it is ringing, it might well be God calling. Question is, will you take the call? God has always had a direct line of communication with men from the beginning of time. God called Adam one evening, but Adam was hiding in embarrassment because he was naked, so the conversation was on speakerphone. Adam was hiding, but he soon found out that God knew that he had messed up. Genesis 3 verses 8 to 12. Sometimes we don't take the call from God because we have messed up. Like our friend David, the king who had sex with another man's wife. His phone was ringing the whole evening, but David ignored the call and eventually turned it off. Then he got in deeper and arranged for the woman's husband to be killed. And so this time, God did not call. God sent a brother from church, a brother who functions in the prophetic, a brother who had a word from the Lord about you, and then it all comes out that God knew what you had done all along. Had David answered the call from he was going up on the roof, he would have been saved from the messing up experience. 2 Samuel 11 and 12. I like David. You've got to like David. He messed up royally, and after the prophet Nathan left him, David did not waste a moment. The guy knew what 1 John 1 verse 9 says, that if we confess our sins, God is faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. When you have the time, read Psalm 51. This great Christian brother did not try to deny or explain away his sins. He went straight to God. Bear that in mind when you choose not to answer the call from God. He might just be calling to save you from sin. Moses was an old guy, an immigrant who had settled down in the land of Midian. One day he was out minding his own business when a call came in on that phone. This old guy, his phone hardly ever rang, and certainly not an out-of-town call. This one was, and the caller was persistent. God was calling Moses, and so he answered the call, and you know what happened afterwards. God was calling Moses to take on an international assignment. Moses was not trained in diplomacy and political science, and the little he knew that if he went back to Egypt, he would be a dead man to come and negotiate a deal with the Pharaoh. But God knew he had the right man, and so God worked through Moses' many excuses until that long call ended. Moses went and told his father-in-law that he was going back to Egypt to check on his family. Right. Now the Lord had said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you are dead." So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back to Egypt. And he took the staff of God in his hand. Exodus 5:19 to 20. Then there is our friend and brother Paul, formerly known as Saul. His phone had a bunch of important numbers, religious and political leaders in Jerusalem. It was around the season when Jesus had ascended into heaven, and shortly after, a crazy, wild movement emerged on the Jerusalem scene. It was a rapidly growing movement of followers of Christ. This is the same Jesus who some of Saul's superiors in the religious community had overseen his crucifixion. And although Saul was not there, he knew of Jesus, and he knew that Jesus was not really a friend of his group of friends. So imagine when we get to Acts 8 and Saul's phone became extra busy. Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off men and women, put them in prison. Acts 8 and verse 3. Saul became the Christian community's worst nightmare. One day, he assembled a team of guys to accompany him to Damascus because he got several calls that there were some Christians down there. He set out one day to go conduct this raid. That day they were going to bring in as many Christians as could be tied to horses and dragged on the highway from Damascus back to Jerusalem. But the phone rang, and it was a number he didn't recognize, but he took the call. There was no mistake. He knew from the first sentence on the other end that it was Jesus. This time, Jesus got straight to the point. Saul, what you are doing to the Christians, you are really doing to me. Would you know that this militant man, he melted under the call. And he said, "Who are you, Lord?" Then the Lord said, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads." So he, trembling and astonished, said, "Lord, what do you want me to do?" Then the Lord said to him, "Arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." Acts 9 verses 5 to 6. That one call was all it took to bring this tough sinner to surrender to the call of God on his life. He went on from that day to become a world-class evangelist and Bible teacher, a leader among the Jesus' followers who he once persecuted. As he was in Rome for business, he wrote, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek." Romans 1 and verse 16. Well, later, while he sat in a jail in Rome awaiting execution for his actions and his activism among the Christian community, he had absolutely no regrets about taking that call many years ago from Jesus while he was on the Damascus highway. "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing." 2 Timothy 4 verses 6 to 8. I don't know if your phone is on or not. Maybe you have been getting calls from God, but you have not been taking the calls. Maybe you are being like David in that God is calling you to resist the temptation to sin, but you are too far gone, drawn away by your own lusts. James 1 verses 14 and 15. Let me tell you, the next time your phone rings, take the call, please. Or maybe God has been leaving messages on your phone telling you that he wants you to engage in being an evangelist or a small group leader in your church. Take the call. Maybe, just maybe, God has a big assignment for you, my brother, and you're thinking that you're too old or you're not qualified. Still, I say to you today, my brother, next time the phone rings and you see that it is God, take that call.